Chapter 44. Confronting the Evil. Professor Chen's voice became piercingly shrill, amplified by the narrow confines of the tomb chamber, stirring a mix of confusion and concern among Fatty, Shirley Yang, and myself. Why had the professor's voice changed so suddenly, considering his state of madness? I shook Professor Chen's shoulders repeatedly, hoping to bring some clarity to him, but to no avail. Instead, his shouts grew louder. "Don't go out! Don't go out!" he repeated while flailing his arms and desperately pulling on mine. Worried that Professor Chen might do something to jeopardize our safety in his delirium, I called Fatty over to help subdue the professor to the ground. Shirley Yang, concerned we might harm Professor Chen, rushed over to stop us. Just then, Professor Chen snatched the ancient sheepskin book from her hands, tore out the last page, and attempted to chew it. The sheepskin, centuries old, was tough to bite, but that didn't stop the professor from frantically trying to bite and chew it. Since the incident on the stone bridge, Professor Chen had been benignly delirious. Why this sudden hysterical behavior? A person whose nerves had snapped like his shouldn't be susceptible to the corpse flower's illusions any longer. Could he have become possessed by an evil spirit? Did he not want us to find an escape and leave this place? Fatty managed to pull the chewed sheepskin from Professor Chen's mouth. The sheepskin was undamaged, but the professor's mouth was bleeding profusely. To be safe, we decided to bind him temporarily. I was most worried about the damage to the last page of the sheepskin book. If it held the key to our escape, it would be a serious problem if the professor had damaged it. However, the last page was stained with saliva and blood from Professor Chen's gums, but it was blank, devoid of any drawings or symbols. I said to Shirley Yang, "It's a disaster." The professor licked away the prophet's prediction. Shirley Yang reassured me, "Don't worry. There was never anything on the last page of the prophet's sheepskin book." I felt some regret for my recent panic. Why was everything so difficult today, leaving me restless and unable to calm down? There seemed to be something off about this tomb chamber. Yet since the prophet's predictions had been accurate, he surely would have foreseen what actions a mad Professor Chen might take. Therefore, the last page of the sheepskin book was intentionally left blank. It seemed that every move we made in this stone chamber was predestined, and all my worries were pointless. I decided to just let go and let things happen as they would. Fatty and I seated ourselves with Professor Chen sandwiched between us, while Shirley Yang continued to read from the booklet. The professor, restrained on both sides, couldn't move but ceased his shouting and only struggled silently. Shirley Yang continued to explain the prophecies in the sheepskin booklet. The prophet predicted that 800 years after his death, his tribe would have already moved far to the east to avoid disaster. Meanwhile, Zaglama Mountain welcomed a new tribe from the western deserts. Within the mountain, they discovered the Ghost Cave, which the tribe's shaman claimed was the abode of a demon god. This tribe was the precursor to Jingjue Kingdom. The queen of Jingjue possessed a pair of ghostly eyes that could see into the underworld. She mastered rituals using a jade eye sacrificial vessel to summon the spirits of black serpents, with which she conquered over 10 neighboring countries. Their heathen atrocities enraged the true god, who then gave the mountain and its vicinity over to the demons. The desert swallowed their cities and everyone in the country, along with the spirits of black snakes in the ghost cave, was deeply buried underground. Fatty, growing impatient, urged Shirley Yang to hurry up and move on to the next part so we could leave the oppressive confines of the tomb sooner. Shirley Yang said, "The last part concerns a revelation about us, the 4 who entered the prophet's tomb chamber. The revelation foretold the survival of 4 due to the mountain's collapse. One of the individuals would be a descendant of the holy tribe." With curiosity peaking, I pondered, a descendant? Could it mean someone with the bloodline of that ancient tribe? Since it's not specified, the probability could be highest for you. Otherwise, how come neither Fatty nor I have dreamed of the ghost cave? Plus, you might have inherited some of your tribe's prophetic abilities, glimpsing a place you were destined to visit in the future. Fatty agreed. "That's absolutely right. Must be Miss Yang. Old who, we never paid attention before, but she's got a bit of a hooked nose and her eyes are slightly blue. We thought it was just because she stayed in America too long, but now it looks like she's inherited her ancestors' bloodline. And she's not purely Chinese after all. Concerned that Fatty's blunt words would upset Shirley Yang, I quickly added, "Your heritage is genuinely unique. But why do you have the Yang surname?" Shirley Yang seemed somewhat in disbelief and shook her head. "I don't know. My family for generations has been Chinese. Maybe it's through my mother's lineage. My grandfather has a more pronounced hooked nose. But whatever the prophet's record says about the descendant, it's not important right now. What's urgent is that we need to leave quickly. The prophecy shows that the sage will point out an escape route for his tribe's descendants. But we must never drop the sheepskin book on the ground. If the book falls, that will signify the start of a sandstorm, and yellow sand will once again envelop Jingjue's ancient city and Zaglama Mountain. And this time, the mountain will be buried under the sands until the end of time." I hastily reminded Shirley Yang, "Then we must not let this sheepskin book fall to the ground. Otherwise, it would immediately trigger a massive sandstorm, and we would be buried under the ground along with this sacred mountain before we even have a chance to leave." "Is there anything else in the content?" Shirley Yang answered, "That's the last part. There is nothing beyond it. The sage will point out a path of escape. See if there are any clues on the remains of the sage." Understanding the sheepskin as a ticking time bomb, Shirley Yang knew that it couldn't make contact with the ground before we left Zaglama Mountain, lest the great sandstorm prophesied by the seer be triggered. To prevent any accidents, she opened her carry-on bag, ready to safely stow the book. Just as we finished speaking, Professor Chin, previously held between Fatty and me, suddenly mustered a strange strength, broke free with a wild cry, and rushed at Shirley Yang, screaming at the top of his lungs, "You'll never leave!" The three of us were startled by Professor Chin's cry, not because it was shrill, but because it hauntingly resembled the cries of Yi Sin, who had recently died. In those seconds while we were still registering the shock, Professor Chen had knocked the sheepskin book from Shirley Yang's hands, threatening to unleash the sandstorm that would engulf the entire city and sacred mountain.